All right, well, welcome everyone, new and old friends alike. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Prudence Herrera. I lead the Passive House practice for Morrison Hershfield, which is a building science, facade engineering, mechanical, electrical engineering firm. And I'm honored to have been with Passive House Accelerator for this half a year. As I mentioned, my co-host Monty is taking a break this week. He'll be back with us next time. And for those of you who are new to our community, we're definitely an inclusive and inquisitive bunch focused on sharing lessons learned and conspiring. And what I mean by that, when you dissect that word, it literally means together, conspiring, breathing. So as a community, we envision and find practical paths to decarbonize the built environment. We want to know all about you. If you're new, we welcome insights and questions. So please introduce yourself in the chat, connect with us on LinkedIn and the Passive House Accelerator community. And as we kick off our show tonight, go ahead and shut down that other browser, close up your email, take a deep breath and let the workday go. We made it to hump day, guys, another week. It's time to have some fun. So unmute yourselves for a moment. And let's all toast to the resilience of community in spite of adversity and the new friends we're making, but have not yet met in person. May we meet and toast in person soon.
Soon.
Cheers. Soon.
Cheers. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
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 All right, now go ahead and mute yourselves and get ready. We've got another great show tonight. First up, we have a video by Stantec on the first Passive House certified higher education building in Canada. And then we've got just a fantastic presentation by Todd Rothstein of Avesta Housing. For those of you who weren't with us last week, we had a great presentation by Lois Arena of Stephen Winters Associates that covered some of the innovative non-residential typologies out there. And we talked about how virtually any type of building could be a passive house. So tonight, in our video portion of the happy hour, we wanted to highlight a project that's not only a new typology when it was built, but had a project team that had never done passive house before. Total newbies. So just to show you that you do not have to be a passive house expert to push the envelope and do something new and bold. Let's have a look.
It's a building that's really never been built before, anything like it.
This is our first real passive house building. We had to learn how to rethink the details. We had to learn how to rethink the design.
The biggest challenge for this project is the height of the space.
It is basically a 30 by 30 meter building, 10 meter tall. So the volume is big enough for 3 floors, but we only have 1 floor. So bottom line, we had to be 3 times better than an ordinary passive house would have to be in the same location. The Wood Innovation Research Lab is a research building right next to the Wood Innovation Design Center. And it was built to, well, accommodate research and give us more room to work with our students and on our research projects. Well, personally, I think pretty much every building we build today should be as energy efficient as possible. And Passive House is the leading standard in this category.
So the big interest we see recently in Passive House comes from their track record. Some larger European studies have shown that passive house buildings on average perform as they have been designed, and that's different from other green building rating systems that have had a more mixed result. And as municipalities, owners are looking for some control over the energy performance, at the end of the day, they got really interested in the passive house standard.
The idea is essentially to reduce the energy consumption radically in a ballpark of about 90% of your heating and cooling, to get away with a much, much smaller system, so basically almost half the building passively working on its own or working for itself.
From the ground up, it was a challenge just understanding how we were going to assemble all of the different components for the project to meet passive house standards, given the end use of the building.
If you have the right team and if you have motivated people on board, you can actually pull this off. So it was a pleasure to see that neither the contractor nor the architect nor the engineer had practical experience with working on passive house projects. Just because they were really motivated and wanted to do these kind of things, it actually was a blast to work with them, and it worked out very well.
It's wonderful to see this building completed. It's our first certified passive house building, and it was a particularly challenging one, so it's very rewarding to see that all the efforts came together and the building is here now. I also think the building has significance far beyond being one pilot project. I hope that this project can help the local wood industry to find a market for higher quality products. This building is part of our journey towards using those resources and adding more value to them before we ship them away. So I'm hoping that this building can be part of that.
All right.
All right.
Thank you to Stantec for that. All right. So we're going to go into breakout rooms now for about 3 minutes. This is our chance to get to know one another real quick and do some rapid fire introductions. So we'll go into rooms of about 5 or 6 people each, and we'll see you back here very soon. Have fun. Well, it looks like everybody has joined back in. So I'm going to jump into some quick announcements, and then we'll get started with the rest of the show. So I have changed the way that I'm doing announcements as we discussed last week. So you can find all this information at PassiveHouseAccelerator.com. We're doing a Passive House Weekly Roundup. So I want to, we've got today's happy hour, of course. We also just released episode 3 of the Passive House podcast, and it features an interview by Matthew Cutler-Welsh, who I believe is on the call right now. Matthew, are you there? He's there. I saw him. He was on the phone earlier. We all got to see him. He was unmuted, so he's definitely here. Anyway, Matthew interviewed Graham Verholst and about his project, the Charter Tech building in British Columbia, award-winning building. He also talked about his career. It's a really great podcast. Please check it out. FIAS has announced a save the date announcement for its Hootenanny series. So if you're familiar with the Passive House conference that FIAS presents every year, a highlight of that conference are Hootenannies, or panel discussions with builders and educators, architects, policymakers. FIAS will be presenting a series of Hootenannies on the evenings of October 26th through the 30th. So you want to save that on your calendar for sure. And we also have a few trainings coming up from FIAS, so you can visit their training and events calendar for more there. International Passive House events. There's a lot going on with PHI in the next couple of months, including the 24th International Passive House Conference, September 20th through October 8th. And if you want to, you can bone up on Passive House with their PHI Passive House Fundamentals course, which is a 20-hour crash course in Passive House. And the fee that you will pay to do that course will apply for registration to the conference itself. And also open days will happen mainly virtually, November 6th through the 8th. And so there's a bunch of information about that, including how to do a video tour of your project and be part of International Passive House Open Days. And then we have the ongoing online Passive House and Building Science gatherings, of course. We have the North American Passive House Network's Lunchtime Special with Ken Levinson. I know Ken is on the line today, or is a part of the call right now, and we'll be sharing an intro to Passive House tomorrow at lunch. And then also tomorrow we have the Fine Home Buildings BS and Beer Show. It's about what about sealants? And we have the Mark Wiley Show with Dave Cooper, BS Fridays. And Mark, hopefully you can share in the Q&A a little bit about what is on tap. I know it's a special event this Friday, so let us know. And then next Wednesday, Passive House Canada has its Building Conversations webinar featuring an interview that Chris Ballard will do with German about WSP and other info from Tracy Johnson. So, and then finally, next week, we have special guest, Maureen Sanchez will be the presenter at the Passive House Happy Hour. She's going to be talking about the Passive House Dorm, the Student Center at the University of Toronto Scarborough campus. So we're really looking forward to having Maureen join us. And with that, I will hand it off to Prudence.
All right, so on to our featured guests for the evening. So one of the main questions that gets asked again and again when it comes to high performance approaches to design and construction, like Passive House, is it worth it? Is it worth the money? And that was the question that was posed to our guest, Todd Rothstein, who's Director of Construction Services at Avesta Housing 2 years ago by the Maine Real Estate Managers Association. They wanted to know, are all of the mechanical systems specified by engineers really worth their investment to save their property? Money, actual dollars and cents. And the research brought Todd to some pretty interesting places and ultimately to a tried and true answer on equipment and deep retrofit solutions. And that was, keep it simple, stupid, which led to a study of over a dozen buildings commissioned over a 15-year period showing how high performance buildings do use less energy than code compliant buildings. We all know that, but he's got the numbers. And that data actually inspired housing associations in Maine, where he's based, and New Hampshire, because it was the first study to actually make a side-by-side comparison of energy consumption based on high performance building standards. And he looked at Passive House, LEED, Energy Star. Todd's fantastic work has helped Avesta see clearly that in fact, they can no longer afford to build developments that are not high performance. So thanks for joining us, Todd.
Thank you very much. And this is a wonderful opportunity and a special occasion, not because I'm wearing a college shirt for the first time since June. And obviously, I'm going to be doing a presentation to over 127 people worldwide. But today is September 9th, and 31 years ago today, I bore witness to my first child, a son named Andrew David. 6 weeks early, 8 pounds, excuse me, he was 6 pounds, like a little chicken came out. Today, he's a grown man. He lives in San Antonio, Texas. He is actually an instructor for the U.S. Air Force. And he, 3 months ago, had his own baby, a beautiful girl named Gabriella with beautiful cheeks. I haven't been able to see yet because of what we're all going through. But I invited him tonight to see if he'd join me as a present. And so I'm not looking, but Drew, if you're out there, Dad loves you. Happy birthday. Now for the rest of us, I'm going to try to connect with my journey that I've started at Avesta Housing, like Prudence had said. Avesta is a nonprofit affordable housing developer, property manager, and a maintenance company. And I was hired there in 2013 because prior to that had 12 years experience in construction, mostly in remodeling retail stores and restaurants and office spaces and housing. I happened to remodel their facility and a year later was hired to work in their asset management department. And that allowed me to integrate with the property management team, maintenance team, and development teams on, of course, renovating buildings and finding ways where we can reduce operating expenses. After 5 years in the asset management department, yes, I was asked that question. Todd, we don't know what we're being told. Is it worth the money to spend on expensive engineering equipment and so on and so forth? So I did the research. and I'm going to show you in my presentation. I'm going to share my screen. Just bear with me 1 second. In housing, there are many criteria that go into the ingredients for what we create. There are challenges. In affordable housing, we have fixed cost cap financing. And of course, all of you in building know that rising labor and material costs are putting a crunch on actually what we can build. We're not oozing with money. Now, we live in Maine, and we serve the people of Maine and New Hampshire. And our temperatures range from -10 to 90 degrees on an average year, 100-degree swing. Outside, the humidity ranges from 55%, 95%. And so we have a challenge on the exteriors. But our residents, they know there's a large swing exterior, but on the inside, they want it to never move between 70 and 75. Humidity, only between 40 and 60%, nice and cool and dry. Property management wants to make sure that our energy demands are going down and thermal comfort is coming up. Because if they're not, the residents that we serve, nearly 5,000 people, will let them know. And so what goes into this criteria? Is it worth it? In 2018, I was asked that question. And so I took a look back when I first started at Avesta Housing in 2013. And this was one of the first projects that were actually completed. It was a garden-style apartment, small, 25 units. It had all the bells and whistles that people could throw at it. Mechanical thermostats, remote access digital controls, two boiler rooms, solar preheat, efficiency design in the envelope. And when I went to visit the building, this is what I saw. 2 mechanical rooms. And by the way, this is all that could fit in my camera. What you're not seeing are the pumps and drives on the ceiling and all the preheat equipment behind me for 25 apartments. Every time I go into this room, it makes me feel like I'm in a nuclear submarine. And I said, why are we doing this? And in fact, here's one of our challenges. We spent $30,000 in 3 years after our first certificate of occupancy. No one knew how to run the equipment. No one realized that the preheat module wasn't connected to the mini boilers. And so things were breaking and overworking. Our costs, $100 a month per average per resident in just the utilities, about $2.40 a square foot. Let's keep an eye on that. So the next year in 2014, I was asked to renovate a property in Bridgeton, Maine. They had high heat and propane use costs. So what do you think I did? That's right, I kept it simple, clean. 2 boilers for the heat, 1 for the hot water. We had a VRF drives, we had our efficiency drives, and the result, $1.90 a square foot. But here's the real learning moment. From 2014, when we did the renovation, 2015 through 18, we progressively were reducing our fuel expenses. That's a win. The next year, I had another boiler replacement of a large, almost 18,000 square foot building, senior property. There were 48 units. Old boiler, about 20 years old. Did it again, kept it simple. This really showed some great savings. In fact, we had a 23% reduction in fuel consumption year over year. And so we're winning, as I thought. The next year we went to replace the windows. Simple, same building, knew exactly where to go. But what did we see? Opened up a window, rot. Opened up another window, rot. Went to the back of the building, rot. So got panicked. We stopped exactly where we were going and decided we were gonna have to make some choices. We found, actually, that the contractor 15 years prior had replaced house wrap with 1-inch rigid foam. a new product at the time that was being introduced, maybe not new, but new to this project, and it wasn't in any of the drawings. But as you can see, the first drawing with this gentleman's photo on the left, he's lifting an entire section of vinyl that wasn't even nailed in. They didn't use the right nails. That's just a small aside. But in the center photo, you're seeing these large gaps. What's that? That means they didn't glue or connect all the rigid, and they didn't tape it. So they didn't do air sealing. So I did what any good project manager would do. I called somebody else. I said, what do I do? Actually, I called Jesse Thompson from Kaplan Thompson Architects. He's my go-to expert in the field. We chatted about it. He said, I've got to find the rot. Let's remove all the rigid. And we did. But the idea, instead of replacing it with rigid, was to replace it with a Henry Blueskin. Because I only had a limited budget. It was either one or the other. And so we went this direction, and my company trusted. Now, of course, I took some liberties when we stitched everything back together. The old building on the left is looking old. And now we've took some architectural design risks, and it looks very nice. But here's the interesting part. Remember, I told you in 2016, we had a 25% reduction because of the boilers. And I was really crossing my fingers on what was going to happen by removing an inch of insulation. And so in the following year, we saved another 5% based on air sealing. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was a paradigm shift for me in my approach to buildings. I mean, yes, I can save fuel by efficient boilers, but I could also save by having a better envelope. And the connection was paramount. So that was the existing buildings up to that time when I was asked the question about how we're doing it. Is it worth it? But what about high performance buildings? How do they operate? I took a little research on 2 key buildings from that year. This is a LEED Platinum building built in Gorham, Maine, 23,000 square feet. Wood frame, electric baseboard, has a solar array, natural gas for the domestic hot water. How did it perform? And I took a look. And as you can see, for a 23,000 square foot building, we used about $23,000 worth of fuel. That's electric and natural gas. That's all inclusive. Lights, corridors, laundry, elevator. Average $70 a month per apartment. 88 cents a square foot. Pretty good. Better than what I was showing you from before. I did another research. This is Bayside Anchor. This was a Kaplan Thompson building. And 45 units, 38,000 square feet. Same thing, wood structure, electric baseboard, solar array, natural gas for the hot water. Results, fairly similar. $70 a month per unit. These are efficiencies, 1, 2, and 3 unit apartments with families. 99 cents a square foot to operate. Not bad. I did further research because we do developments, and HUD requires that we do performance. Our banks require that we do performance when we figure out our operating expenses. This is a 2019 report for HUD's allowances for our units, heating, cooling, cooking, lighting, domestic hot water, refrigerators. As you can see on the left, it shows $142 as an allowance. A 2-bedroom would be $173 per month. So why is that relevant? Because of what I showed you before. In an efficient building, if I can show $70 per unit all in, there's 2 thoughts here. As an affordable housing operator, I can provide an allowance for people, and by building efficiently, I can save that money to put back into operating expenses, things that I'll need, roofs and windows and doors and such. As a private developer, well, you could market yourself as a low-cost operator, a low-cost expense for a resident to live in your building. Now, I've always asked, these are different buildings, and how do we know that we're really saving money if all buildings are not created equal? Well, I'd like to introduce you to the Meadows at Grapevine Run. It's in New Hampshire. The building you're looking at right here was started in 2017. It is a code compliant, nice building, propane heat, hydronic system, 24 units of senior housing, wood structure, so on and so forth. It was a 3-phase project, and we completed this one, again, like you said, at the end of 2017, with the intention of building 2 more buildings. We chose to go passive house for the next 2 buildings. This is what it looks like after the first building was built. In the photo, and on the right, you'll see the orientation of the next 2 buildings. And when we started looking at the costs or the differences between a typical building, code compliant, and a passive house, as you can see, insulation in the foundation was up by twice, the insulation in the walls by 50%, insulation in the attics, you get the point, more insulation as a starter. We made sure that our air sealing, our weather barrier, our vapor controls were all in line. As you can see, our soffit detail was built outboard of all of those layers. Some just logical details on how we built this building. We took our original plans for air sealing and redlined them to make sure that we passed our blower door test and our ACH requirements. So we all know high efficiency is going to cost too much. We were worried about this. So what I did is, for you, in 2016, the building on the left, as you can see as a spreadsheet, was $2.895 million. That's just the building. Get rid of all the soft costs and all the site work. Well, 2 years later, almost to the day, I added up all of the real costs of the building for a passive house design in the same location. Came down to $3.15 million, 8% difference. I factored in the 1.5% cost or rate of inflation, and the delta between the two is 5%. 2 years later. And 2 years later, here's what you have. The building on the left was the first building you saw. It's a code compliant building. The one on the right is a passive house building. And we're just starting to fill them up. There's another building, by the way, on this site that we'll discuss. I'll have numbers for you in another year. You'll have to invite me back when I do the calculations. So with all that said, I needed to answer these questions. Can we prove that high performance buildings are worth it? And is it worth the money? And can we display the findings in dollars and cents and common sense? And so we went back to work. We created a benchmark tool for all of our buildings, our operational functions of all of the buildings that we had. I narrowed it down to 17 buildings that were built over a 15-year period, all double corridor buildings that didn't matter if they were senior, family, housing first. It just meant I needed to keep same-like buildings. None of these here are renovated buildings, all brand new construction. I want you to see that we saved it in the year that it was received the certificate of occupancy. So 2005, 2017, the type, number of units, the square footage, the BTUs per unit, square foot, so on and so forth. And categorized each building by design. High performance had some components to it, obviously passive house certified, LEED certified, so on and so forth. Now, I want you to keep your eye on the property names. Just look at that list. And I'm going to click, and you notice how the names changed. Now you go to the yellow line where it's million BTUs per square foot. And then you look at the building design all the way to the right, and what happens? All the code compliance, they go to the bottom. All the high performance, LEED, Passive House, they go to the top. And on average, if you look right in the middle, these numbers per square foot of energy are 100% less than the code compliant buildings. Okay, go back to the properties. Fix your eyes on those because they're going to change as I click out. Buildings are going to move around. Now we went to total operating cost per unit. What things changed, but what happened? Most of the code compliant buildings still stayed on the bottom of the database. And the high performance, sure, things are going to move around up and down based on size, based on number of units, but code stays in the bottom. High performance came to the top. 100 and same average. About here you are at $800 a unit versus $1,200. So maybe you're at 50% cost savings. That's real money, by the way, in operating. Now I want you to look at it one more time. Properties, they change again. I go back to the right. This is total operating cost per square foot. Same thing happened again. I didn't even try to make this happen. All the code compliant buildings stayed at the bottom. All the high efficiency buildings stayed at the top. Here's the biggest thing that we realized. I'm saving real money per square foot when I'm building a high efficiency building. So if I can borrow $200,000 to go from a code compliant building in New Hampshire to a passive house building, I'm reducing my per square foot cost per square foot per year over a code compliant building. Now, that allows me to reduce my operating expenses. But also, what I'm trying to use this formula for is to be able to introduce more solar to our buildings. But it allows me to show Maine Housing, New Hampshire Housing, you all in this global network, that high performance buildings, they do work. And they do show that they pay. So for Avesta, what we realized is that, you know what, a 3 to 5% cost increase, if we can afford it, is worth it. We know that the buildings are going to be more resilient to Mother Nature because of the envelopes that we develop. Residents, well, anyone who's a certified passive house designer, consultant, or even remotely knowledgeable in this arena knows that thermal comfort is the basis of passive house itself. And with 5,000 people, at any time they're comfortable, that means they're not writing the senator or the governor or the congressman about why they're unhappy that they're too cold, too hot, too this or too that. That's good. Now for property management, we can save money in operations. That's important. We have a 99-year commitment to HUD to keep these buildings. Our energy consumption is reduced, and as we build more passive house buildings, our carbon output is getting reduced. That's my message I wanted to share with you, and I've used this information to try to promote passive house and as a QAP, which is a qualified application for points to be able to build more buildings to Maine Housing and New Hampshire Housing. And if you have any questions, this is going to be a Q&A. Let's start.
All right, thank you so much, Todd. This was wonderful. And for the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to take big picture questions, and then whatever questions remain, we'll roll into the after hour. Is our question concierge ready?
Yes,
ready to roll, Sean?
I think I told Caleb to get ready. Caleb, you are kicking it off.
Hey, Todd. Actually, I have a house up in Belfast, so I'm very familiar with Maine and
learned the climate
Oh, yeah.
and spent the last spent 6 months there. Just came back to Brooklyn a couple of weeks ago. But my question was, and it's probably like self-explanatory, but what was the cause of all that rot in that house?
Right.
In that
So,
building?
sure. So, by the way, 1 inch of rigid insulation on a 2x6 wall with insulation is going to, there's 2 parts. One is 1 inch is almost a death knell of condensation and of a dew point. So we recommend in our climate 1.5 to 2 inches because we want to push when vapor turns to water, we want to push that out of our wood structure. And so that's a primary reason why we're concerned about that rigid insulation and causing the rot. Second is because there was no gluing and taping. So we didn't have a continuous air barrier and insulation barrier on the outside. So when wind works its way in and cold works its way in and frost gets on that wood, and then the heat from the inside of the building comes through, and then it has no way to get out of rigid, it starts to rot that flake board.
I'm assuming that the blue skin is vapor open.
Correct.
And that you didn't have worries of having the condensation, considering it's an insulated cavity and it's probably...
No, I mean, most of the worry there is the fact that, look, hot goes to cold. So in the winter, I'm always afraid of all the heat that I'm generating in the building is going to walk its way out through the wall. I get that. And that's why you put your insulation on the outside, hold it back in. Or if you air condition your house, your apartment in the warmer climates, you don't want the hot to come in, right? They're fighting each other. But with the blue skin, we said we were going to sacrifice a loss of heat in lieu of a better breathing building and less rot opportunities. And what happened was the blue skin gave us the air barrier that we were missing before.
Great
Great
stuff.
question. Thank you.
Great answer. Thanks, Caleb. Next in the queue was Jalen, and then we got Tom. I think Jalen is still there. Just check. Oh, no. Okay. Tom Phillips.
Hey, great talk, and thanks for selling me on this. Not that I needed to be sold. The big picture question is, this is what subsidized housing, public type housing. How do you export this to the rest of the market in terms of their economic incentives and cost structure and whatever?
It's interesting. Great question. We're a private nonprofit. And yeah, we get seed money from Maine Housing and New Hampshire Housing, but we still do private financing. And where we look to put our money is in the envelope and the energy systems and comfort for residents. For instance, we don't buy stainless steel kitchen appliances or fancy lights or stone tops because that's not where we put we're not marketing it to the highest bidder. We're marketing it to, honestly, the lowest bidder that can afford our buildings. Now, so we want to be in it for the long haul. It's a 99-year relationship. The private market is challenged where they say, why do I want to spend 5% more money in something you can't see? Unless you can market it that if you're offering lower energy costs to your residents, your renters, or if it's a condo, it's still an expense that you're better than the person down the road that's doing code compliant. That's the biggest thing. Look, owning a house, renting a house, failure is not a good option. Meaning if you're having weather problems, hey, my wife is very upset when she's sitting in the couch in winter and has to put on a sweatshirt. It's not an option. A passive house that focuses on less than 2 degree difference or 3 degree difference between head to toe and room to room, right? That's our building science training, is a more comfortable building. That's what we try to incorporate that in our buildings, and people should be marketing that to the residents because comfort is king.
A quick follow-up. Do you have some data on comfort or overheating risk and things like that? We can do that offline.
I would love to. I would love to.
Great.
So let's keep
Thanks.
that. Yes.
Tom, great follow-up question, and maybe again that's how we can kick off the after hour with that discussion. Great stuff. In the queue we had Laura and then Harvey. Laura, you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's sort of a non-passive house question, but I saw in your budget that the 2016 building had over $200,000 for the fire protection system, and the passive house only 50 some odd thousand. That seemed very extreme, and I was wondering, has it anything to do with passive house or something else?
It's something else. Of course, the first building was responsible for the fires. So we have a 15,000 gallon fire suppression pump system. We're on our own water and we have a own water and own septic system. So the first building did have higher expenses in fire suppression because it had basically it's serving all three buildings. So that one's slightly higher. So if you took out, you could add another, if you divided it out, added it to the other buildings, or you might have a slightly larger spread between the two buildings for that cost. But it had nothing to do with passive house. It had to do with the first building had to take on a little bit more than the first building.
Yeah, I just saw that anomaly, and it was just such a huge anomaly. I was wondering what it was about.
Well, trust me, last night Prudence said there's going to be somebody who's going to, in a millisecond, going to see the number. And I try to keep it in the...
If I had a bit of money, I figured Laura would be one of the ones to spot that. And again, we'll probably pull that spreadsheet again in the after hour because I know like some of the numbers are, again, I mean, it's specific to your projects, but it is interesting to just see some of those difference. And again, thank you very much for just having that present because again, some of the questions here are great because you provide a lot of transparency and we're seeing it with these questions. So great. So thanks, Laura. And Harvey, you had a couple.
Yeah, I do. I think you may have just touched on one, and maybe that'll be the after hour, which was Todd. First of all, great presentation. Your passion is contagious. Thank you for that. The first one was when you put up the two buildings side by side with your construction budgets. Yes. Being a renovator, I love the budget. So I think it was around $300,000 difference, and I don't know if we can do it now, if you can put it back up, or we can do it after. I just was wondering what the main line items. I noticed one said on one of them you had $83,000 of general labor, then it was zero on the next building.
Yeah.
I always pump in my general labor because I got guys who do a whole bunch of different things. Like so I understand that. I'm just wondering if you can put that up later. That was number one.
I will. Okay.
Number two was, is your next step to renovate out all of your code compliant buildings? I know you guys are, you're constrained by budget, but that was it was a very interesting thing that you started off on one building, you ripped off all the vinyl, slapped on the blue skin, and had such great savings that I thought, well, maybe on these code compliances, we're going through that great spreadsheet you had. That's got to be your next thing to save money.
It's not in the foreseeable future because we're so behind in providing housing for Maine and New Hampshire residents. We're trying to bring in more housing. I think I believe we need 20,000 new apartments and housing facilities in Maine, and we only do 200 to 250. We're pushing up the envelope a little bit. We're just one of several developers, so we're so far behind and focused on new developments and major rehabs of existing not ours, but if we purchase a property and renovate that. So we're doing deep energy retrofits of some existing. Yeah, honestly, I've got like 20 projects I could have showed you that we've done some deep energy retrofits.
This is a quick follow-up then. If you looked at those code compliance on that list, what would be 3 or 4 things that you would want to do on those buildings?
Great. So we would want to, even if I was going to do the siding and I couldn't afford blueskin, I would tape and air seal. I would tape all my seams of my boards, right? I would try to work in solar, as it's so obvious that solar can generate enough energy on site. I would then air seal my attic spaces. This is what we do mostly. So the foundation, the air sealing the walls, and then get to the roof. What I told somebody yesterday, the 4 biggest keys are the envelope, of course, solar. The other was mechanical systems, how we reduce those. And the last was, I can't remember what I said to her last night. I'll think of it after the.
Probably if it's envelope, but maybe even Windows if that's separate. But anyway,
Windows,
thank you so much.
You know what?
All the best.
All right, thank you, my friend.
Great stuff. Now we got a couple mics. Mike from New York.
So first of all, great presentation. That was cheers. The second is just a question of just user feedback. It's a 3-parter, but they're all the same question. Where it's how do the occupants feel? Are you getting any feedback? Do they notice a difference? If they do notice a difference, does that start to provide some sort of value that helps you in the next building or the next project? And then along with that, is it helping you win future projects or in the business as a whole?
All right, so I'm going to answer this question from a different perspective. When we were looking at that passive house, comparing it to code, we were over budget when we started doing our numbers, and we were pushing hard. So we stopped, had a pause, and said, you know what? Maybe we can't afford passive house. Maybe we just go back to code compliant. And we started kicking the numbers back and started putting in a mechanical system and all the hydronic heat and baseboard and pumps and blah. Guess what? We can't afford it anymore. We're building 3 buildings right now. One is 50 units, another one is 40 units of senior housing, and another one we just completed is that. The other one we completed was in 24 units. And all of them are electric baseboard units. We can't afford mechanical systems because they're just outrageously expensive. So we're falling into passive house guidelines. If we're going to go all electric, or we're going to go Innova PTAC window units and the like, we have to build out our envelopes. We have to tape and air seal like no other. And because we can't afford the mechanical systems to make up all of the losses if we don't build an envelope properly. And so, so that's what we're doing, number 1. Number 2, by the way, you see it, what I'm saying there? Like we can't afford to not do it.
An interesting way of looking at it, going the other way, that you literally can't afford not to do passive because of what do we do to mechanical budget?
We can't afford mechanical systems. We just can't afford them, and it's insane. 3 days ago, I walked the building. It's a 40-unit building, senior housing, and it's got a public utilities waiver. It's all electric, blah, whatever. So we had 8 wires for lights that penetrated through the shell, and so I went to our owner's rep and say, hey, these are foamed. Can you make sure they just nip off that foam that came through and have them tape that? And I got pushback from that request. And I invited them to come to this presentation because if they only would see what those things do, they don't realize how those 1 or 2 things have to be clarified, even if it's not a passive house. We have to be building in this direction. And so that's what we're doing. And yes, by the way, I can send you some testimonials of people that said, oh my God, I can't believe how it's so much nicer. I'm so much more comfortable. 40% of our residents are seniors. And so, being near windows and just walking around with low energy and not going outside for winters, we have to make those buildings just comfortable. And we try to do the best we can.
Great stuff there, Todd. Sorry, Mike.
Good.
Yeah, there's a couple of good segments there dealing with comfort that we'll talk about in the after about, you know, seniors. So Mike in Seattle.
So the 1% escalation per year, I think we've been at 5 to 6 pre-COVID is pretty high. So that was kind of interesting. But the Housing First units had a significantly higher operating cost per square foot. Is that a function of just how small they are with comparable loads?
Thank you. Yes, sir. That, trust me, that was another question that Prudence and Zach were going to say. They're going to ask this one. You better be ready for it. And so, yeah, you know, when you look at the size of some of these buildings, like we have some code compliant, look, I want to step back for a second. The ocean water at some point butts up against land, right? The two are different, but they meet. So I'm going to have some great code compliant buildings, and I'm going to have some weak high performance buildings get really close when I show the data. Now, what some of the separation can be is, yes, some of those code compliant for Pearl 1 and Pearl 2, those are 60,000 and 56,000 square foot buildings, multifamily, so high density of residents, high mass walls, no cooling systems, basic HERV systems. And so, yeah, that makes up a big difference when we're talking about 20,000 square foot buildings with 24 small ladies living in a building, basically. Yeah. And so, yeah, that makes a difference in how some of these will operate.
That was it. Thanks.
Great stuff. All right, Zach, where did the time go?
Yeah, I know. No kidding. So I want to do 3 things real fast. First, I want to thank our sponsors who make all of our work possible. And I just want to emphasize that these are mission-driven companies that are really partners in our work to help accelerate the decarbonization of buildings. So definitely check all of them out. Our founding sponsors are Baxt Ingwe Architects, Mitsubishi Electric, RDH Building Science, StoCorp, and Zola Windows. And our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA. Our patron sponsors are Morrison Hershfield, 475 High Performance Building Supply, and Partel. I also want to say that and remind you to join us next week for our happy hour with Maureen Sanchez of RDH, and she'll be presenting about the Passive House dorm at the University of Toronto. It should be an awesome presentation, and Maureen is fantastic, so please join us. And finally, I just want to say to my colleagues in the United States, let's get out the vote, all right?
Yeah.
This. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep. And everyone, they're advising that if you actually do want to vote by mail, that you get that squared away now, send it in as soon as possible ahead of Election Day, so that we're not waiting. We're going to be waiting for the outcome anyways, but the sooner we get it done, the better. Thank you so much, Todd, for your fantastic presentation. I think we still have a ton of questions, so if you can hang with us, there's much more juicy stuff to explore in the after hour. And thank you everyone for joining us. If you have to drop off, we hope you join us again next week. And if you're new to the community, definitely check out the Passive House Accelerator community. You can ask questions in there, see resources, go to the happy hour page, and you can see the presentations that went before that you may not have been able to join, re-recorded for you to look back on. Lots of resources. All right, so let's move into the after hours.